Right now we have another impact wrench teardown review. This time it's the Husky H4455 impact wrench. Home Depot sells this for right around $80 and claims it has 650 foot-pounds of torque. I'm going to do a couple quick tests for a review, but the main event is going to be tearing this Husky impact wrench apart. We are going to look at the insides and see how well it's made. I also have a similar kind of impact wrench here. This is, as you can see, a very well used Ingersoll-Rand 2100G impact. When we get the Husky apart, I suspect we'll probably also take the Ingersoll-Rand apart so we can see how well they compare inside. These lug nuts are torqued to 100 foot-pounds, which is the factory spec. First up, the Ingersoll-Rand. Pretty quick. And now we have the Husky. You know, my casual observation is that did take them off a little bit faster than the Ingersoll-Rand. Right now we are going to do a quick feathering test to see how well you can feather the trigger. I know we've all used impact wrenches where the trigger seems like an on-off switch. So let's see how this one does. Well, I would have to say that trigger is not that sensitive. Just for a comparison, let's try the Ingersoll-Rand as well. Let's start getting into the build quality of this thing. This is a composite design, which means that all this is going to be molded plastic, and the end pieces are cast, I believe, aluminum. The casting on the end pieces all looks good. They are well painted. I only noticed one little flaw, it looks like. You can see what appears to be some kind of corrosion or bubbling in the metal right here under the paint. As far as the plastic goes, it all looks well formed to me. The mold lines are here on the back of the handle and the front of the handle where the two pieces of the mold came together for the plastic. You know, they are reasonable. It's not anything that would catch your hand. There's not any big pieces of flashing coming off the mold lines. Overall, the cosmetic build quality on this is pretty good. Let's start tearing into this the way you disassemble this impact wrench. There are 4 screws here on the backs. They are torque screws. They go all the way through and screw into the cast aluminum hammer case. Whoa! Those are really in there. Okay, that's not going to work. I got all 4 of the screws loose. Those were the tightest screws that I have ever come across in an impact wrench I've disassembled. I was not sure they were going to come out. I thought they might strip there for a second. All the screws are out. We can really start taking this thing apart. Starting on the back here. There's the hammer assembly inside the hammer case. We'll look at that more in just a second. One thing I can see already that I like, the gaskets here are plastic rubber type material. I don't know exactly what they are made out of. I don't see any markings, but they're a type of material that you can probably reuse if you ever open this up to service it. Some impact wrenches will have paper gaskets, which often rip when you try to disassemble the impact, so you can't reuse them. We are going to get into this switch a little bit more, and we will take this assembly apart. There's a ball bearing here. If you ever take one of these apart, don't lose that. That basically serves as the detent. So what that means is when you are moving the switch between the different positions, that little spring-loaded ball bearing falls in a corresponding groove here on the inside of the switch housing and holds the switch in place in the various positions. I don't see any markings on the switch that would tell what kind of plastic it's made out of. I'm guessing it's reinforced with either glass fibers or something because it's pretty stiff. That's a solid piece. I've been looking at this for a minute, and it's easy to see why there are two O-rings on the switch assembly. The way this works is the air comes in from the compressor here and will go out this opening on the back of the housing, then into this opening on the back of the switch assembly and up through this gap. And at that point, the air travels between the two O-rings on the switch itself. So that's how you're controlling. You can see where the air goes into the air motor because it's going between those two O-rings. Here inside the switch housing itself, you can see everything is really nicely machined. This is a cast piece which is then machined. We have detents here for that little ball bearing as I was talking about to hold the switch in different positions. Overall, a well-made piece here. Let's pull out the air motor now. There we go. Either I'm really bad at finding them, or this is not marked with any kind of indicator of what plastic they use. I cannot find anything anywhere. What I will say is this is a pretty well-formed piece. You can see it has basically these valleys here that the 4 screws ride in that hold the thing together. Everything looks good. There's not a lot of casting flash or anything from the molding process. It seems, nice and stiff. A quality piece, it looks like to me. One thing I notice that I think is easier to illustrate now that it's apart is the trigger pull. Look how short that is. I did not have much luck feathering it, and I think it's because the trigger pull is really short. Compare it to the Ingersoll-Rand here, and that has a much longer trigger pull. So it gives you more opportunity to feather the trigger if you need to. Here's the air motor itself. Let's get into it. There's this little washer here on top of the bearing. This is the side that obviously would go into the hammer mechanism. There's a bearing here, a 6002Z. The Z is because, of course, it has a metal shield here. And 6002 is quite a common size. This is an NBK brand bearing. I had to Google that. NBK is a Taiwanese company, but it appears they have their factory in China. Now that we have this opening open, I can see there's another plate here. So the way this goes together is like this. I don't know if this plate is here to prevent wear, just to simply redirect the air, or possibly both. We'll get that out of the way. Okay, onto the end plate here of the motor. Not the greatest machining in here. If I just grab a piece from the Japanese-made CP743. You can see just the finish on this is fantastic. This CP734H just has build quality through the roof. This is not terrible. I've seen worse. In fact, I think I can show you some slightly worse here. This is out of a cheap $20 Harbor Freight impact. It might be hard to see, but the machining is slightly rougher here on the end plate. It's smooth, definitely smoother here on the Husky. Into the motor now itself. Take off the housing here. Here's the cylinder itself for the air motor. One thing that's interesting about this is it is blued, it appears. I haven't seen that before, and I've taken apart a good number of other impact wrenches. For an example, here's again a part from the Chicago Pneumatic CP734H. You can see this is just raw steel. Also, the Chicago Pneumatics rated at about 425 foot-pounds from the factory. The Husky claims 650. Significantly more, and you can see why. The cylinder is larger, the rotor is larger, all that gives you more torque. On the Husky's cylinder, the machine work looks good. On the end plate, or on the ends of the cylinder here, it's all well machined. I don't feel any burrs. All the holes appear well drilled. Again, everything in this appears to be pretty well made. I'm kind of hesitant to tear apart my Ingersoll-Rand 2100 impact here because that will mean I will have 4 different impact wrenches disassembled on my workbench. But I really want to show you how this Husky compares to some other brands, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. I took apart the Ingersoll-Rand, and now we have a four-way comparison here. From left to right, the Husky, the Ingersoll-Rand, the Chicago Pneumatic, and finally the cheap $20 Harbor Freight. We can see some differences here. The Harbor Freight is only rated at about 250 foot-pounds. The Chicago Pneumatic about 425, if I remember correctly. 550 foot-pounds of torque on the Ingersoll-Rand, and the Husky is the most, 650, and you can see some of the reasons why. The cylinder is way bigger than the cylinders on either of these two. It's similar in size to the Ingersoll-Rand with one significant difference. The Husky has 7 rotor vanes, whereas all the others only have 6, so clearly that plays some part in developing the extra torque. Here we have a close-up of the air motor vanes. Look how much bigger the Husky is compared to the Ingersoll-Rand, Chicago Pneumatic, and Harbor Freight. This is what gives you more power. Not only is it simply larger, but there are 7 of them compared to 6 in the other impacts. That's just more area for the compressed air to push against in the air motor, which ultimately gives you more power. Next, look at the material used. The 2 more expensive impact wrenches, the Ingersoll-Rand and the Chicago Pneumatic, use a plastic material, and looking at some of the details on here, it looks to me like this is injection molded plastic. Someone correct me if I'm wrong here. The 2 lower priced impacts here have phenolic resin material used for the vanes. That's something that's been used for air motor vanes for years. It looks like it's simply stamped out of a phenolic resin sheet. Looking at the machine work on the rotor itself, it's pretty good. It's not the best out of these 4, but it's far from the worst. The machine work here on the splines of the shaft, they look good. They're not quite as nice as the Ingersoll-Rand, and they're definitely not as nice as you'd see in the Chicago Pneumatic. Again, this Japanese-made Chicago Pneumatic impact, the build quality is just fantastic. Now to compare the Husky to the worst of the 4, the cheap Harbor Freight $20 impact. You can see just really crude machine work here on the splines. That's just an example of kind of the cost cutting and rude, crude work they did on the Harbor Freight. Again, totally serviceable work here. Not the finest of these 4, but still looks good. Let's get into where the real magic happens, the impacting mechanism here on the Husky. Okay, well, this is your basic twin hammer. Well, it tells you right there, twin hammer. This is going to be the same kind of mechanism that I think was really popularized by Ingersoll-Rand. Now you find it in just a ton of different impact wrenches. So you have your hammer cage here, your anvil here, and your 2 hammers. Let's bust out the calipers and do a few quick measurements. On the Husky, 0.784 inches. On the shaft there, the Ingersoll-Rand, 0.784 inches. Exactly the same. What are the odds of that? I think we may have some copying on our hands here. While the diameter of the anvils here between the 2 might be the same, they're obviously not identical. You can see some machining differences in the small details. On the hammers, obviously they're patterned after the same design, but the dimensions are not identical. My observation is that the machine work is slightly better on the Ingersoll-Rand, but the Husky is not bad. One difference I wanted to point out between the Husky here and the Ingersoll-Rand is just kind of a design and construction difference. You can see here on the Ingersoll-Rand, the rear motor plate and the housing are a single piece. So what they do is they cast all this together, then they machine the various parts they need so you can install the rotor and the bearing and everything in here. It looks to be a really well done piece. This is a little simpler design, and from what I've seen, a more common design. The end plates are separate. You have the housing here, which is a separate piece. It seems to me that it's just, this is a simpler design to machine than this single piece that has to be cast and then later machined. Taking a look at the hammer cases here, not any significant differences that I can see between the two. The Ingersoll-Rand, which obviously is this well-used, beat-up one, weighs a little bit more. I don't know if that's because it has a larger metal bushing, or steel bushing, I should say, down in there. The rest of the housing is aluminum. Another thing that's a little strange on the Husky is look at all these voids in the casting. They're all symmetrical, except there's not one there and there's one there. I wonder why that is. Anyone have any reasoning why that might be? Overall, though, pretty similar. So when it's all said and done, how does the Husky stack up? Well, overall, I would say the build quality is good. There's good machine work on all the parts and construction in the plastic as far as I can see. I might like to see a little better material used for the air motor vanes, but you know, phenolic resin is what companies have been using for air motor vanes for years. On the performance side, you know, it has good power. It has more power than my beat down old Ingersoll-Rand. One improvement I would like to see is a little different trigger mechanism or trigger pull so that you could feather the trigger a little bit more. I forgot to mention earlier, this is made in China, but in this case that does not mean it's bad. For $80, you're definitely not getting ripped off. It's clear where that money goes compared to a cheap impact like this $20 Harbor Freight. The Husky has much better machining on the parts, much better overall construction, a more complex design, and it comes with a 2-year warranty. So if you're looking for an impact wrench and this fits your needs, especially if it ever goes on sale, then this is not a bad choice. It's not quite as well made or as powerful as some more expensive impacts, but it's way better than the cheapest impacts out there. So if you have any questions or corrections or comments, go ahead and post them below. If you like the video, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe so you can see my new videos when they come out. And thanks for watching.